really good. So we can just kind of get started here, and maybe you guys can just start off with telling us a little bit about Bikeout.
Yeah, so actually, I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about like why how we got connected to ESA. So I'm Temple alum. I went to the School of Communications, and we were looking for office space as we were starting to do a lot of the planning for Bikeout. And 1810, I guess it opened in 1810 Accelerate opened about 6 to 9 months ago. So we weren't aware that that was an opportunity. And actually, interestingly, it's something that I wish I had previously. And I'll talk a little bit about some of my personal history with entrepreneurship and the relationship there. But we were really fortunate to find 1810 and really excited about it. For a small company like us, I mean, just starting, access to office space was crucial. And so we were trying to find a space that not only was affordable, free in this case, but also a place that had a growing community and a place where we could find other like-minded people. So 1810 kind of worked out really well for us. And then, we've just been trying to be in touch and meeting folks in the 1810 community and wanted to find a way to provide some value from what we've learned in our personal history. So we're really excited to kind of be able to be a part of this. I think my experience has been that the network that's created around entrepreneurship is the most important aspect. Just having people to talk to and reinforce some of your ideas, or tell you that your ideas are not great. That's also valuable. But yeah, so a little bit about Bikeout. And Amanda's going to talk more about kind of what our plans are. But our history is that we actually essentially created a minimum viable product, an MVP, about 4 years ago. It was an event that took folks from downtown Philadelphia on a protected bike trail path to Schuylkill River Trail, to a farm in the surrounding region, so in Chester County. And the idea was get people out of the city, get people on bikes, and take them to this special experience where they could kind of retreat away from kind of normal everyday life. And so, our mission and really why we do this event and what we're trying to do is to get people to experience bike travel, which is an industry that exists but is really niche. And we see a lot of opportunity in not only introducing people to that concept, but also in the traction that we've seen as we've grown over the past couple of years. And so since 2016, we've taken 1,000 people on our trips. And now Amanda's going to talk a little bit about kind of like what our expansion plans are. We're certainly going to get into how we've thought about taking it from a standalone event to an actual business. We hope we can talk a lot about that during the session. But Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about our plans and how that came together?
Sure. Yeah. So again, as Brian mentioned, we were really lucky that our events the past 4 years sold out pretty quickly. So we were pretty excited, and we saw a lot of similarities between what we were seeing in Philly and potentially what could be possible in other cities. So for 2020, we really set out with this goal of Brian and I transitioning into doing Bikeout and experimenting with it and launching it as a business. And ultimately what we wanted to accomplish was, one, expanding this overnight model that we had tested in Philly the past 4 years to other cities. And then two, to experiment with some other products as well. So one thing we had talked about, is obviously our overnights, which are again, just a one night weekend trip, are really accessible, a lower price point for 200 to 300 people. But we said, we wonder, now that we have a community here of between 1,000 and 2,000 people in the region, would they be interested in taking longer trips with us that were potentially further and more expensive? So our goals this year really became experimenting and expanding that overnight model to new cities, and then also experimenting with longer trips as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great, framework and explanation there. So that's awesome. Yeah, I think this sounds really great. I think next, I was kind of wondering, maybe you guys could explain a little bit more about yourselves and, how you guys maybe, started this, and, a little bit more about your backgrounds.
Sure. Do you want me to start, Brian?
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah. So my partnership with Brian, I actually think is really excellent in that we both come from backgrounds that are very different, and in a very, I think, special way, we complement each other so well in a way that really benefits Bikeout and the growth of our business. So when we were starting, we basically divided our roles up into two different titles. So mine presently is head of experiences and operations, and my background personally, I have a history of working in travel and international education. So prior to Bikeout, I was working for a leading study abroad company here in Philadelphia, and had started in a customer service position, but eventually was overseeing our community development and opportunities for our alumni. So I was leading trips every year and doing international development programs everywhere from Western Europe to Thailand to different national parks across the US. And in addition to my guiding experience, just really found a love for logistics and experience design. So it worked out really well that Brian's skill set complemented that. But in terms of what I do for Bikeout, I oversee basically all of our logistics. So when we're planning new overnight events, I'm the one who's reaching out initially to trail partners, or different partners that help make the ride possible, thinking through the route, thinking through our rider journey, all of that good stuff. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about how my background informed my role now. But I'm really excited to leverage my skill set in logistics. And I should say as well, the organization I was working for before was also a small company. So it was a really great experience to kind of get a bird's eye view of small business and help it grow. And I think I'm really excited now to leverage those skills in growing Bikeout.
Yeah, and I mean, so from my perspective, I was really lucky to find a co-founder. I think it's one of the, like Amanda, I think it's a really hard thing to find someone else who's really passionate about what you're passionate about, and also fills a skill gap that you don't have. I think, we find out every day we're finding more and more ways that we complement each other through the ways that we are producing what we're doing. But yeah, so I mean, maybe dialing it back for a second on like how Bikeout came together. We both had done some bike travel, but we didn't know each other. I launched Bikeout to fill what I saw as an opportunity to provide these kinds of trips to more people. And so interestingly, Amanda actually had reached out before we put tickets on sale that first year and said, I really think this is interesting. How do I get involved? And the kind of the relationship evolved from that, which I think is, it's hard to find that. So I feel very lucky to have someone who immediately saw the same thing that I saw, the potential in what we were doing. And so my background actually had nothing to do with travel, which is why Amanda's skill set is so important. I actually, 10 years ago, after graduating from Temple, started a publication that covered the local technology community. It still operates today. It's called Technically. And we produce, every year we produce Philly Tech Week. And so I actually left that company last year because of Bikeout and because of my own kind of personal interest in trying something new. But I think where I balance Amanda's expertise in those logistics and that travel experience was coming from, one, my role with Bikeout is in the marketing end of things. So I'm managing, how we sell tickets and how we get the word out about what we're doing. And then of course our brand experience. But I think my unique value was that I had the experience of going through the steps to start a company before. I think that's been pretty helpful for how we've been able to take this concept and bring it to life. And so yeah, I think very different space, but the same steps and the same process, right? Like entrepreneurship is about testing ideas and building out a plan that can sustain a team and also fulfill a mission. So yeah, I think we both bring very unique aspects to it. And it's been a really great experience to kind of go through the planning process with Amanda. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great background. I think that's really interesting. I like the story. I think that's really cool. So I think maybe if you guys could get into a little bit about some of the history of how it's been so far, and maybe some of the challenges and some of the wins you guys have also had at this point, and just talk through some of the kind of early stages up to where you are now in terms of, how things have been and what that's kind of looked like up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, so, obviously we're going to get to what is maybe we haven't even really touched on it yet, but, the changes that are currently happening because of the global health and financial crisis are very much upending how we're thinking about our future. And I think we'll get there. So it's kind of a weird moment for us in terms of evaluating the wins. We just essentially launched in February. Obviously, we had been producing the experiences in the past and had that general framework for what our product was, but developing a strategy that included producing those experiences in multiple states, large scale events. Obviously, there's a lot there that we can no longer do, at least in this particular moment. So, and I think there's some questions later on that Steve and Emily put together addressing that in particular, but it feels kind of weird not to bring it up. But yeah, I mean, I think like that we're being optimistic and also just valuing the work we put into the planning process. And really what that means is, we spent 6 to 9 months building out a financial plan and a business plan and a really set vision and set of principles for what our company was going to be, that even in these really challenging times is helping to inform how we'll operate. And so yeah, I mean, it's funny, like you hear a lot about like lean startup and some of those, nimble business building blocks, right? I think they're really important. And basically that's what we did, right? We had a minimum viable product. We tested it continuously. And then after we knew there was something that was of value, we started putting together the foundational blocks to actually start a business, right? But at the same time, I think the process that we went through of really building out a long-term plan was a fundamental aspect, even in the stability of maintaining some sort of sanity in this current moment. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the steps we took around a pivot that we're working on and not working on as things change so rapidly later. But I guess I just wanted to highlight that the process of entrepreneurship, those steps are so important. And we're seeing that and living that right now. And so Amanda's going to talk about kind of like the steps of balancing the business planning aspect with the actual launching of products, which I think is also important to highlight, is there is a balance there. Like you can talk about your business all day, but if you're not producing, you're not going to get it off the ground. So we're going to hear from Amanda on that in a second. But I mean, just to kind of lay out those steps, and today we're going to share some of our actual, we have like a checklist that might be helpful for folks that are starting a business. But essentially, like if I had to pull out highlights of the most interesting or challenging parts of what we did in the past 6 months, number one, customer interviews. I think that's something that can easily be forgotten how valuable the impact of those interviews can be. Learning about what your customers are interested in and having that documentation at a scale that shows a wide breadth of different opinions was really valuable, down to, as I mentioned just kind of briefly there, like we're thinking about a little pivot here in this moment, and we had customer interviews that pointed us in the right direction, things that we could solve for now in this time of change. So yeah, I think, we talked to 30 people and we talked to each of them for an hour, and we really got to know not only what our product was, but what our kind of what our brand or who our audience was. So in a very kind of detailed way. And then second, I just want to highlight too, like the financial model, the time spent on that, which I think it was the most time consuming thing. It gives us confidence in what we're doing. Amanda had left a full-time job. I left my full-time job to pursue this as well. And so just the more time spent on that modeling, it can feel kind of like a task that, someone tells you have to do. But we're just kind of seeing the reality of that modeling being so crucial to where we are right now. So in terms of like, again, Steve, your question of, what were the most challenging parts, definitely like spending the time on that stuff was really hard. But we think that the learnings from those things was really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to elaborate again, I think Brian and I are sharing very similar sentiments. But for me specifically, starting out, I'll be the first to say that having not had the experience of starting a business and also being very focused on the logistics of our future events, it was very challenging for me to balance walking through the steps of doing a business plan and also feeling like I had to hold that in the same hand as actually working on our products. But as Brian said, and looking back on it now, I'll say one, I think the Trello board that he built, and hopefully Emily and Steve can share that with you guys, is incredibly well done for someone whose forte isn't logistics. Brian is incredibly detail oriented and it's an amazing resource. So definitely check it out. But looking back on it now, I'll say that I think all of that work has been invaluable. And like Brian mentioned, in a very real time, we're having a moment now where we're like, okay, this is what we thought our products were, but amid a health crisis and amid a pivot for our business and looking at new products, we're asking ourselves questions like, are these new products in alignment with our brand, with our mission and our values? And knowing that we have answered all of those questions in the past makes these very real-time conversations that much easier. Albeit they are very challenging to have by their nature, but having done the work of a business model and a business plan gives you a very strong foundation to come back to, so that way when you do start to get caught up in the day-to-day of running your business, you don't have to go and set aside all this time to answer a lot of these really big picture foundational questions. So yeah, I would say that was a challenge for me. But looking back on it now, I think that everybody should do as much of it as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are some really good points, and I dropped that checklist link in the chat here for everybody. We can also send that out again as well. But I think that's some really good steps on there. That's definitely stuff that they teach us in the classes here at Temple, or kind of walk us through the motions of trying to at least think about some of those basics of saying, hey, look at your business plan, like start thinking about what this might look like, and just how you guys explained, like in real practice, that's exactly the stuff you need to be thinking about. So yeah, all very valuable information there. And is that something you guys want to get into next year? Maybe talking a little bit more about some of those things you worked on, the business plan, and maybe a little bit more on the checklist and some of the stuff you guys had wanted to talk about in terms of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amanda and I did talk about this, and we didn't want to get too lost in the checklist itself. We think that quite literally, it's the list that we use to start our business, right? So I guess even having started a company previously and kind of knowing the orbit of things that needed to be done in order to start a company, it always feels so vague, at least to me. I don't know if there's others that feel that way, but the idea of what is a financial model, what is a business plan, You can Google it and you find templates, and it's like, I don't see myself in this document. Like, I don't see our business in this document. And so, so yeah, I think that what that checklist was meant to do is kind of put a real life experience in the context of some of those steps that you read about, and maybe hopefully set some context to why they're important, and also set some context around like how long some of it actually takes, or how important or not important a step might be. So yeah, the checklist itself is just meant to be a different framework for thinking about how you do it. But yeah, I mean, I think like the fundamentals, as I mentioned, like the customer interviews and really kind of thinking through what your product is so crucial. We spend a lot of time, I mean, I almost want to pull up the business plan now, but just spend a lot of time asking ourselves questions about not only like, what were the hard features of what we were offering, but also like what were the principles around which we wanted those to relate to our company culture, right? So yeah, it became a very like meditative process, as opposed to just a list of financial needs. But yeah, I might be rambling at this point, actually, honestly. Amanda, help.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, I think a lot of you, as Steve mentioned, are learning a lot of this in your courses, and I'm sure you do case studies as well. But if anything, I would recommend clicking through the Trello board just to get, again, insight on our personal experience, because Brian did pepper in a lot of information on sort of how we specifically handled each of these steps and what each of them meant for us. So like how long it took, what it cost, how we approach things, like, putting together a pitch deck and what a soft launch meant for us. So even if you're looking for some anecdotal experience of a company that has launched, it's still good to read through, at least for that perspective.
Great. Yeah, I think that's some awesome feedback. So
yeah, sorry, see, I just want to say one other thing.
Go ahead.
We also, I mean, I think you all, I'm not sure how many folks on the list were either working on a BYOBB project or not, but yeah, doing this work was really, we just applied as well as on the alumni track. And, it was mainly, there was a couple of reasons we applied. One, like we had a plan that was basically in place, and BYOBB became an opportunity to continue to refine that. We found that, and I found in my previous business, that we were always updating our plan and our quote unquote pitch deck to help explain our story. And so there was never a moment that we stopped working on that in 10 years with technically my previous company. And so yeah, BYOBB was an opportunity to have that forcing function to get us to the next phase, so to speak. And having a mentor was really valuable. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that, those real life opportunities are really great ways to force you to a deadline. So we're definitely excited about BYOBB. That's all. Sorry to interrupt, Steve.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, that's also some great feedback on that as well. I think, next, I think there's so many different things to talk about. And I think, maybe touching on a little bit more about the current situation would certainly be good. But I think maybe before we get into that, I wanted to hear a little bit more about, expansion to other cities and how that worked, being based in Philly, and then, recently kind of explaining those expansions to, other cities, and kind of how that worked and how you guys, had a plan for that.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. So yeah, looking at new cities, we had learned a lot in Philadelphia, and in that regard, we could go to new cities with some confidence that our event would work, knowing that those cities had similar characteristics. But it was also a lot of testing and just reaching out to different people. So looking at new cities, I would say it was both a mix of sort of like aspirational, like where do we want to go, mixed with, what gives us the best chance of success. So originally, we were looking at cities on the East Coast just because of their proximity to Philadelphia. Mostly we were looking at major cities simply because the audience would resemble one similar to Philadelphia. We want to make sure that there are enough people to purchase tickets and have an interest in attending our event. So on the docket for 2020, we had Chicago, Atlanta, New York, DC, and Boston. And I'll say in my work to do the initial steps of putting together the event, so reaching out to trail partners, seeing if we can find a venue, I would say for almost all the cities we were successful. We were getting the green light, people to say yes, but of course we found, as is true with pretty much everything you do in life, it definitely does depend on who you speak to. So there were definitely people who said no, or, we got roadblocks from, but we found that, it's just about continuing to ask and finding the right partners. So yeah, really, and some of the characteristics we were looking for in our other cities, like I mentioned, was a large enough population, one that mimicked Philadelphia, access to a protected trail system nearby. It's really important for Bikeout that our rides are not on major roadways. And since our cyclists and bikers, a lot of them are new to biking, we wanted to make sure we could offer the same sort of protected and accessible experience that we had here in Philly. And then of course the other major component was just a venue, finding a local farm or winery or XYZ that was open to sort of this untraditional thing of having 200 to 300 people come and camp out on their land. So once we sort of got the green light and all of those categories, we were like, okay, great. Like we can definitely find all the other missing pieces, which are partners like bike shops and caterers and beverage partners to help make the event possible.
Yeah, that's great. And you sort of touched on it a little bit, but what kind of experience is needed for going on, a bike out, excursion with you guys? How, can beginners join? How does that exactly work?
Yeah, sure. Brian, do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, Amanda too. I feel like even going back to telling a little bit more about what the product specifically is could be helpful too.
Yeah, sure. So the answer is not a lot of experience. One of the things that actually sets Bikeout apart is that most of our riders are new to long distance bike riding, or specifically bike travel or biking and camping overnight, or even just one aspect of all of those. So in that regard, our rides capture a wider audience than what is normally seen in the bike tourism industry. Right now, a lot of larger bike tour operators cater to a very affluent market of generally people who are between the ages of 40 and up. So Bikeout is really unique, right, in that it caters to an urban audience, people who are new to the experience, and again, a much more diverse set of backgrounds that were in attendance. And we think, again, that is for multiple reasons. But one is that the ride is really well supported. So again, we're riding on protected trail systems. We carry people's gear for them, so they can just ride with their backpack that has lunch and water and meet their tent and all their other gear once they arrive at our venue or our farm. And then we also work with local bike shops who provide mechanical support. We have an EMT. And then lastly, once everyone arrives at the farm, we have a great farm to fork meal. We have drinks. It's a very, an experience that's very hands off for the rider, meaning that mostly everything is prepared and done for them, and they can sort of just relax and celebrate and enjoy the accomplishment of the ride. So in that way, we found that we were catering to a much larger market than maybe what is currently being served by the current bike tourism industry. So to answer your question, Steve, we would definitely say that the rides are meant for beginners and people that are new to the experience, and we do see that reflected in the audience of people who ride at Bikeout.
Gotcha.
Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Brian?
I mean, I think you said it, everything you said was great. The lesson from putting together our pitch deck was interesting, I think, in that we had this basic premise that we felt like the thing that we were doing was making bike travel easier for people. And that's true on a product level, right? Like it's kind of it's a niche hobby. It's a little bit intimidating in the sense that for the average person who maybe only bikes a couple of times a month, or maybe even just a couple times a year, the idea of going on a 120-mile 2-day bike trip seems like an impossible task. And so on a product level, our solution was, how can we eliminate some of those things that seem intimidating that maybe aren't as intimidating? So for example, some of the people that ride Bikeout do not own a bike, but they're really interested in long distance running. They run half marathons, right? It's a huge audience of people who are doing those kinds of activities. And so what we're able to do is introduce this new or different sport to a wider audience. But then, I think as a business, the opportunity there is, if so many of the tour operators that currently exist thought about it in that context, that it's not just about bicyclists. It's really about people with crossover interests, like camping, like local food, we have a list of 4 others I'm forgetting in this very second. But yeah, if you can widen that interest area, you create or gain access to a much larger audience. And so for our business pitch, while our product is about solving the specific problem of making bike travel easier, what we found through the mentorship process and kind of our own evaluation in the marketplace was that the problem that we were solving as a business was addressing a larger market. So how do you capture and tell your story to a wider audience? So that became kind of our, I think those 2 perspectives are interesting and something that we learned from the business planning process.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think those are some great points. And this might be a good transition period, especially based on what you guys kind of explained so far and just the nature of your business, is maybe talking a little bit more about, with the current situation and kind of how you guys are adapting and looking to the future to plan for, what's even established right now, but just in the world, how is this kind of shifting your lens and looking to the future with, what's going on right now?
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about that. So we put our tickets on sale for the first time. I think it was March 10th. And that was the same week that things really started to accelerate in terms of the news of coronavirus in the US. And so, for context, how things are changing so rapidly, we have to check on ourselves on a weekly basis now, where things are. And so that first week, we honestly were evaluating. We put our tickets on sale on a Tuesday, and we were evaluating it from the perspective of, okay, typically our tickets sell out at a much quicker rate, and we were thinking that it was the brand change. We had a new website, a whole new expanded mission. And so there was all these other elements of change that we additionally identified as impacting the sales almost completely. And 3 days later, on Friday, we had, the news had changed so quickly that it was abundantly clear that our early analysis of those small aspects, like the brand change, new website, et cetera, we felt like the sole contributor to our ticket sale change or our product sale change was coronavirus. And so, in the span of 3 days, we had completely gone from, maybe it's related to the news about about what's happening with the health crisis in other countries and coming to America very quickly, to absolutely, this is the problem. So it was kind of an interesting challenge that we were facing. And, obviously 3 weeks later, even that analysis on that Friday of that week, it's just so utterly different, and scarier, frankly. And so, I think our immediate reaction as things progressed and felt like they were getting worse. And specifically for us, that was first, it was 200 groups of 250 people. The CDC advised against those gatherings, which obviously affected our core product. And then, 3 to 5 days later, it was no groups larger than 10. And I think right before that announcement that the CDC put out on the groups under 10, we were still like, okay, so what do we do if we can't host large scale events? And fortunately, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, we, because of our customer interviews, we had asked that question, were people interested in small group trips? So we had literally asked less than 10 people. And so because we had that research completed, it was something that our customers were interested in. It just wasn't a really feasible. It wasn't feasible from a financial perspective. So we put it on the back burner as something we launch in the future, but not something that we were going to focus on for our core products. But in the light of the change that under 250 or over 250 rather, we couldn't operate, that those financial projections started to look a whole lot better since any number is better than 0. So yeah, I think we started looking into that, and and again, a week later, as I mentioned, we could no longer do even the pivot idea. So we started the pivot process, and have been frankly still working on that product, because we feel like looking forward, who knows what will happen here, but we wanted to at least have one additional option for continuing to do our work. And so we're developing, in a trickle of processing all of this, a model for a product that would serve small groups of less than 10 people. But yeah, I mean, even right now, that's not possible. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, and then the other, major obvious one is just that, for our large scale events, we really need to evaluate our timeline for hosting them. We have events on the calendar. Normally our operating season starts in June. So, we're going through the process now of evaluating what changing our operating season looks like. And again, as our parameters and the circumstances are changing so quickly that, we're just trying to take it day by day in some regard, but really helpful again to have the business plan to fall back on, and again, just creating the best plan possible at that time and sticking with it until you need to pivot or change again.
Yeah, and I'll add too, because I think it's helpful. I mean, it's been me kind of evaluating our own picture and then seeing it through the lens of like what other small businesses are going through. But yeah, I mean, like from a financial standpoint, we had a small amount of capital that we put into the company to start it, right? And so our plan was that cash flow would pick up and our sales would start in March. Obviously, we hit the goal of putting the tickets on sale, but the cash flow didn't come. So we are in kind of an interesting, scary moment where the cash flow that was planned, our cash reserves are gone, and the cash flow that was planned isn't here. So we're just evaluating, what is the best next step for us from, there's been a few grant opportunities that have come up. Obviously the stimulus bill has made it accessible for us to consider either the forgiven loans to contribute to our payroll, or also frankly, some sort of unemployment benefits for self-proprietors, and it have also expanded. So to be upfront so quickly, we haven't even really made a decision yet on what the best path there is. But from an individual standpoint, we're two human beings who had a plan to generate our salary and now obviously can't do that. So we're both making, very like personal choices about how we can continue. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of unclear, but I mean, you know, this isn't something that for us is going to stop the year of planning that we did. We've just got too much invested emotionally, dollar wise in what we've been working on. And so, yeah, absolutely. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do next. And I think the other thing that's really challenging, and I mean, I'm sure we haven't even literally talked much about this, but like, there's a lot of like ethical and moral questions that are coming up about, like, for us, we're a travel business. Like, what is the value of travel after this or during this? Like, we've been really grateful, or we are grateful for hearing a lot from our community that, you know, people saying like, people are really going to want to do these kinds of trips. They're going to want to be outside. They're going to want to connect to their local community. And like that's reassuring. And we believe that too. We think that that what we do is something that can be helpful, but also, I mean, you know, it's hard. I mean, for me personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of Amanda right now, but and I'm sure she feels the same way, but you know, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but for me personally, it's like, should I be spending time doing this, or should I be spending time like contributing at a higher level? So, and that's not to say that I'm backtracking off of Bikeout, Amanda, don't worry. But more like, you know, there's financial considerations, and then there's this big picture, like ethical questions that are coming up for us, I think. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think you guys touched on a lot of different points there, and basically a day-to-day situation, but you know, it seems like you guys are in the right state of mind to kind of, you know, keep iterating, keep thinking through what the best moves might be. And I think that's a great lesson for, you know, entrepreneurship in general. It's just the iteration and keep thinking and how to pivot, you know, if and when things like this come up, or just barriers in general. So all very, very good points there. And I think at this point we're getting a little close to time, so I think I'll open it up to questions in the chat box. If anybody has any questions for you guys, you know, drop them in the chat, and maybe while people are, you know, thinking or typing there, you guys can maybe address sort of this last question I had for you guys, is maybe a little bit connected to what we talked about at the beginning and sort of the Trello board. But, you know, what's some advice you guys would give to, you know, Temple students here who are interested in entrepreneurship, maybe want to start their own business one day? You know, what's some words of wisdom you guys have for, you know, us in a position like this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, I think for students right now, it's a really obviously challenging time. So, you know, I totally understand that. And I think that in lieu of everything happening, you know, it can be really intimidating to maybe want to continue with your own thing, or even contemplate starting something new. But I also think that in reality, although, you know, everything happening with the health crisis does have a negative impact, it also does change a lot of things. And with change and new circumstances also comes opportunity. So I think for me, you know, coming into this partnership with Brian, he had that background of experience of having started a business before, and sort of coming from a small company where I was very close to my CEO. I had heard a lot of things about entrepreneurship. There's so many tropes out there, and sort of you know, stereotypes for what it is like. But I'll just say that in my experience, probably everything you've heard, for me, the reality probably falls somewhere in the middle. So yes, like it can at times be very hard and also very easy. There's, for me, a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, those kinds of things. But I still think, and I know that Brian will touch upon this in a second, that going through this process, at the end of the day, has made me, I think, a better human, and also a much more valuable candidate and contributor, I think, for anything I walk into in the future. So I think my advice would just be, you know, I think it is easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening, but I also think it's a great time right now. And you'll see a lot of communities and a lot of positive news from businesses that are pivoting to support the crisis, or local businesses and organizations that are pivoting their models to support their community and respond to what's happening. And I think it's such an incredible learning opportunity right now for people who are interested in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs themselves. So I would look out for those positivity or those positive pieces. And then two, I would say, that, this isn't a time to give up, on entrepreneurship or your goals of starting an organization. And I think there are a lot of opportunities that you can look for amidst everything that's happening, and with hopefully some of the free time that you have on your hands.
Thanks for that. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. And also, I kind of touched on it earlier. I thought this is kind of a funny story that, why I value 1810 so much. So, when I was starting technically 2009, there was no, like, co-working was not really a thing yet. And, there wasn't a lot of kind of flexible space. And so when we were looking we wanted to have an office space, but we couldn't afford it. And so we did this, like, we basically, we got a grant from the William Penn Foundation, which is a local foundation that was supporting journalism upstarts at the time. The journalism industry, as you may know, was upended and continues to be. So support your local newspaper, etc. But yeah, at that time, we got a grant and we negotiated with Temple's School of Liberal Arts for office space. So in order to get a small office, we had to do so much work just to be able to work in the same room together. And so, 1810, yeah, like, it's absolutely incredible to have that opportunity, just as us, Amanda and I, as individuals, but also, I think, like, we were at Temple Center City. We were on, in this weird administrative office that was just abandoned. We used it for a year, and then, like, literally, I think, like, people just stopped checking in on us. So we were just kind of squatting Temple University's space. So it was very strange. But, I think compare that with what you have at 1810, with, being able to see and meet other people who are doing the same work as you. There's no questions about if you're squatting there or not. Just know that it's, like, such a valuable place to have. So that would be my advice right now.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. 1810 is a great place. We're so happy to have it over at Temple. I know I was over there all the time during school. So, it's a great resource for everyone over there. And